Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 9 of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery, called Lagrange Point. And usually about once a season in the show there is one episode which is actually kind of decent or even good, and so this was this season's decent episode, and there's not as many illogical or annoying things about it. There are some entertaining parts, and so compared to the rest of the season, it actually feels like a really good episode, even though it's just kind of decent. It also really reminds me of that Orville episode when Mercer and Malloy had to go undercover pretending to be Krill to infiltrate a Krill ship. And what was so funny in that Orville episode was that they were so bad at it, meaning they didn't even come up with Krill names, they had to make up names on the spot, and so they just gave themselves human names. And they were so terrible at interacting with the other Krill, and so because they were so incompetent and yet somehow still succeeding, that's what made it so surprising and funny. And so here it was really similar, but they were mostly doing it in a serious way, and so the humor wasn't really there even when they tried. There was one scene that was kind of funny, when Michael was trying to do something and Book had to distract one of the Breen guards. And he did it by coming on to him. He started inviting himself over to that Breen's oil bath and stuff like that. And so that other Breen was totally okay with that. So that did make me laugh because it was kind of unexpected and yet so fitting with the rest of Discovery, who always promoted, same-sex relationships and all that kind of stuff. So it's funny to see that even the Breen, even though they are an evil empire, they are totally tolerant with that kind of thing. It was totally okay for two male Breen guards to be flirting on their ship. So that scene was actually kind of funny, and I wish they would do more stuff like it, meaning make the whole episode more silly, more comedic, with more mistakes in their interactions with the Breen, of things going wrong, and yet except that one scene, the rest of it wasn't really that funny. It was kind of semi-entertaining just to see an actual Starfleet team being on a mission together and each one giving something to do and not just Michael doing it all, and so it felt much better than the usual Discovery episode, even though there still were the usual illogical things. And if you actually think about it, how come the inside of a Breen ship is fitted for humans and yet all the Breen have to wear refrigeration suits? Wouldn't it be simpler to simply make the inside of the Breen ship fitted for the Breen and just put Shin Hoti in a suit with an Earth atmosphere in it? Wouldn't it be easier for them? How come it's the other way around? How come their entire ship is fitted for humans and they all have to wear suits with the right temperature? It kind of is ridiculous if we actually think about it. When they previously showed their cargo bay in a previous episode, I assumed they do it that way because that is the place in which they're interacting with other aliens, making trade with other aliens, inviting aliens to their cargo bay, and so it would make sense that the cargo bay will be that way. And yet in this episode we see that their entire ship is like that. Even their bridge, every single room and corridor has an Earth atmosphere and Earth temperature, and so that is kind of silly if you think about it. And it would have been funny if someone actually mentioned that in the episode. If someone actually said, wait, why aren't the Breen simply setting the whole ship's environment to fit them? Why are they all wearing suits? And maybe someone could explain that it's part of their cultural thing, that they're not allowed to show their faces to each other and stuff like that, even though previously we saw that they did do that. Previously that leader of the Breen showed his face to all the other ones, and so they are allowed to show their faces to each other, and so why do they have to wear these suits all the time? Doesn't really make any sense. And it's just convenient for the heroes that they don't have to put any alien makeup. They can simply wear the same suits and then they will not be recognizable. And toward the end of the episode, when the Breen realized there are spies on the ship, why didn't they simply immediately order everyone to open up their helmets so that we can all see the inside? Since, previously they showed it is possible for them to do that and there are no side effects for them. They can open up their suits if they want to. They'll simply become more solid and not be gelatinous anymore. So once they suspect there might be spies on the ship, why don't they simply order everyone to do that, and then they can look inside everyone's suit, and then they can show that Michael and her team have or some kind of hologram that creates a fake image, and that way they can pass that test as well. So I wish there would have been more clever and surprising twists like that, add some more sense of danger. Show a situation in which we think they're about to get caught, and then they somehow manage to get out of it. And yet instead, the Breen are simply stupid. No one even thinks of that. No one thinks, hey, let's open up all our faces so that if there are spies among us, we'll detect them. No one even tries that. And if it was all done in a more comedic way, then maybe the brain stupidity would be more acceptable because it would be part of the comedy. There are some parts in which it is an obvious homage to other franchises. Like the way they get into the brain ship was through their one weakness of an exhaust port, which sounded really similar to Star Wars. That's how they were able to get into that brain ship, by flying a cloaked shuttle inside a tiny exhaust port, and that's how they got in undetected. And I guess that's why they had to make up that whole weird ending of faking the Discovery's destruction in the previous episode, so that all of this would be surprising for the brain. But when we actually think about it, it doesn't really make any sense, because they previously stated that the brain can track the Discovery's spore jumps. And so how come they didn't track the latest one? Just because they thought the Discovery blew up, they didn't bother to try to track the next jump. Why not try to scan for it, and then they'll see the Discovery did not blow up, and then they'll know they're there. I guess it was necessary for this episode's plot to work, but it doesn't really make any sense if you actually think about it. Why didn't the brain simply detect their new spore jump? Is it because the Discovery now is cloaked? So why didn't they cloak themselves previously? It's funny how in season 3 they said that they cannot use the spore jumps while being cloaked, and suddenly in this season they can. I guess since time passed, maybe they improved this technology to make it more compatible, so suddenly they can spore jump while cloaked, and that is why I guess the brain didn't detect them. So why the hell didn't they do that previously? In the previous episode, the only way the brain found them was because they spore jumped to the next location. Instead of, using more clandestine means, why not take some other cloaked ships without any spore drive to that location? Maybe it will take a little bit longer, so what? The brain would not be able to know where they are, and so it will avoid all of this mess. Instead, they spore jumped normally in the previous episode, the brain detected them, then they faked their own destruction, and now they jumped and cloaked, and that's why the brain cannot now detect them, and the brain don't know they're there. It doesn't really make any sense if you actually think about it. And it's also funny how this last jump takes them right to the edge of a black hole. And so, didn't they bother to scan the area they're going to jump into? Or are they telling us that these black holes were totally invisible to sensors for some reason? They had no idea they would be there when they jump there, and so all of this is also kind of silly. And they find out that the progenitor technology is sitting in a Lagrange point between these two black holes. A Lagrange point is a place in space in which the gravity of different objects cancels each other out, and so that object can remain in that place with no interference basically forever. And they also say something about these black holes being primordial, meaning they are ancient black holes from billions of years ago, which remained unchanged somehow, even though I don't think that's how black holes work. Don't black holes get bigger the more mass is pulled in, and so over time they should get bigger and bigger? And so how come this system of black holes wasn't destabilized over time, over billions of years? No other space object ever passed by and destabilized this system, and so it doesn't really make any sense. And then they say that structure they found wasn't actually made by the progenitors, it was actually made by those same scientists who left the clues. And that structure they find is totally unpenetrable by anyone. They have to use that same thing they assembled from the clue. That is also the key to open up that thing, and without it no one could ever open it. And so how come those scientists were so powerful? I mean, maybe they used the progenitor technology to create all these clues, and that explains why they're all so advanced. That explains how that betazoid was able to create that link between two objects over great distances. Normal betazoid telepathy doesn't work over light years. That is something that was specifically said by Troy, that normal betazoids cannot detect anything from light years away. There was that one betazoid who was like a super mutant of betazoids who could do it over light years, but normal betazoids could not. And so that's why I said I didn't buy that whole thing with a betazoid scientist able to create some telepathic link between two objects over light years. It didn't really make much sense. But if those scientists actually found the progenitor technology, maybe they used that technology to create all these advanced clues with advanced materials that no one else can break into and all of that. So it's not yet properly explained. Maybe they'll do some flashback scene in the next episode that will explain all of it, but I kind of doubt it. So here they find this object that they cannot open. So anyway, the brain ship shows up and simply grabs it with a tractor beam and takes it away. And that's why they have to come up with a way to infiltrate the brain ship. So they take a cloaked shuttle, that Book is piloting, and he has to take it into the exhaust port of the Breen ship because that's their only weakness, just like in Star Wars. And they all have to dress up like Breen to sneak around the Breen ship. And they also take Adira with them, and Adira is really short, and so I was waiting for some kind of scene in the episode of some Breen saying to her, "Aren't you a little short for a Breen trooper?" or something like that. Would have been funny, I think. Stamens is worried about Adira, and so he doesn't want her to go, and so he volunteers himself. But isn't that kind of stupid, since, him and Book are the only ones who can pilot the Discovery's spore drive, and so why the hell would they take both of them on this dangerous mission to the Breen ship, leaving the Discovery without anyone to pilot the spore drive? And yet they seriously consider it for some reason. Michael is seriously considering taking Stamens and Book together on this mission, and only because Adira now says no, she's super confident, she's the best one for the job, that's why Michael decides to take her and not Stamens. And no one ever mentions the fact they cannot take Stamens because that will leave Discovery without any way to escape the Breen ship if things fail. And when they are all in the Breen suits, we had a few scenes of showing all their faces on the screen together, and that really reminded me of the Power Rangers for some reason. And also they specifically said that time is crucial on this mission. They have to do things very quickly before the Breen manage to break into that progenitor device. And yet Michael finds time in the middle of this episode, in the middle of a Breen corridor, to suddenly start talking with Book about their feelings and their relationship. So that also cracked me up. In the middle of this crucial mission, that was kind of unintentional comedy in my opinion, because it was so stupid. And when they almost get caught in a few places, I was hoping for some kind of clever way to get out of trouble, and yet what is the way they do it? It's by simply beating up the other Breen guards. So that is the brilliance of the show. Not any kind of clever plan, not any kind of clever dialogue or clever science, it's just beating up your enemy and just hiding them somewhere around the corner in the corridor. And so that's the brilliance of Discovery. So that's really annoying and disappointing and a missed opportunity. The only funny scene, as I mentioned, was the one when Book starts talking with some Breen guard and coming on to him. That was kind of funny, but that was the only funny scene. And meanwhile, in the Federation headquarters, we have scenes of the Federation president talking with Saru and the Vulcan lady, and the Starfleet Admiral is weirdly missing from this scene. And she's telling them how the other leader of the Breen, that female one they talked about previously, Tahal or something, who they often mention as, the strongest Breen leader ever, and of course she's female, and so she's coming over there as well. She sends her whole fleet because she also learned about the progenitor technology. It's funny how bad their communication security is in this whole season. Everyone are hacking everyone's communications and learning about everything that is going on, and also coming to the party. And so how come they didn't use that Infinity device that was introduced early in the season when Cronenberg used it to secretly talk with Michael? Shouldn't they always transmit information that way? And that would have avoided all their enemies knowing about everything they do and coming over. And so that is hilarious how in the same season they introduced that magical device that allows you to talk in secret in that white room, the Infinity Room, and yet they still use normal communications as well, and all their enemies hack all their signals, and all of them come over to join the party. So that is kind of ridiculous when we look at the whole season. So Tahal, who is the most powerful, strong female Breen leader, will come over with her entire fleet, and I bet we won't even see it in the last episode. They always do it in the recent seasons. They kind of hype up some kind of huge space battle, which never happens, and we don't even see those ships. That's what happened in the 2 previous seasons. It's as if they want to have a giant fleet battle, but run out of budget by the time the season is ending, and so they just don't do it in the end. They kind of build it up and then don't do it. And so I'm betting we won't even see that giant Breen fleet which they mentioned in this episode. And then they want to send someone to negotiate with Tahal, and it's going to be Saru, because Saru didn't do anything this whole season, so they have to give him something to do finally. So he volunteers to go to negotiate with the other Breen, and then the Vulcan president is worried about him, and we have a few scenes of them together, and it's kind of strange how this couple might be the best romance in this whole show, even though it is not really that good, but it's simply much better than everything else, and so it feels actually good in comparison. Just like this whole episode is not really that amazing, but because it's not as bad as all the other episodes, that it actually feels like a good episode for a change. So anyway, Adira is the only one who can hack the Breen computers for some reason, and she's all worried that it's all up to her. This whole season they've been saying that Adira is so nervous and so shy and so insecure, and they have to hold her hand so that she'll be able to do her job. So that was kind of funny, and Adira's character development is really upside down of how it should have been. She should have started out as this shy, insecure, nervous person, and later when she becomes a Krill, she should have become more confident. And for some reason in the show it's the other way around. For some reason she becomes more insecure as time passes. So anyway, eventually she manages to hack the Breen computers, and Michael is trying to put something on that progenitor device so that they'll be able to beam it out. And it seems to contain some kind of gateway that sends people away somewhere, and so they constantly send Breen soldiers into it, and yet they don't come back out and they cannot send any signals. And so it kind of felt similar to some of the Indiana Jones movies, when always there's some kind of artifact that the villains cannot overcome on their own. It simply ends up destroying them. It's only the hero that is able to get them in and all of that. So it's a similar kind of situation. Also kind of similar to Stargate, the way they tie the rope to one of the Breen soldiers before they send him in, and then they are unable to pull him out, only the rope comes out. That was similar to one episode of Stargate, SG-1. And Shin Hoti wants to take her dead boyfriend in there, and so she stores him inside a mobile transporter buffer to take him with her inside that gateway. And it's funny that she waited until now to do it. And she even says something, we have to store him so that he won't rot or something. So why did you wait until this moment to do it? Didn't they say that it took them like 10 hours to get here from the previous episode? So why did she wait until this point to store him in the transporter buffer? Why didn't she do it hours ago? Wasn't he rotting all the time? Doesn't that decrease the likelihood to be able to revive him? And so that was kind of funny. I guess maybe he was inside that refrigeration suit, so maybe he wasn't rotting as quickly, but still kind of funny. Why didn't she do it earlier? Why did she wait in the last moment to store him in a transporter buffer? And then the Discovery decides to decloak and attack the Breen ship to distract it once the team almost gets caught, and then they fire everything at the force field of the cargo bay door, which as always is made from hexagons, just like every other force field in this entire show. No matter in which time period, no matter which alien civilization, it's always a hexagon force field. And so they fire everything at it and then ram the entire ship into the cargo bay, which they know will suck the team out into space, but I guess they're used to it by now, and technically they're now wearing these suits, so shouldn't that be protecting them from space? So why are they so worried about it? They're literally wearing environmental suits, plus Michael is really used to the vacuum of space by now, since she's been sucked out into space so many times in this show and nothing ever happens to her, so why are they so worried about her? And also in the end she actually jumps into the gateway as well, before everything gets sucked out, and then that device flies out into space and then turns into a literal Stargate for some reason, so that I guess Discovery will fly in there in the next episode. So anyway, all these unnecessarily convoluted things that were done, I guess, just to draw this whole story out to 10 episodes, it really could have been done in 2 or even 1 episode, just like the chase. In TNG, it was just 1 episode of them chasing around a few clues, finding the secret of the progenitors, and that's it. That's a short story, and yet they do the same thing in this season and drag it all out to 10 episodes. And the really interesting stuff will just be in the very last episode, I guess. So this episode was actually decent. It didn't annoy me as much as usual. It was kind of entertaining in places, but it also had a bunch of missed opportunities and still a lot of things that don't really make sense, especially how come the Breen having to wear refrigeration suits on their own ship? Shouldn't the whole ship be refrigerated and then they can walk freely in their gelatinous forms, and then it will be much harder to hide among them, I guess, and so that's why it had to be this way. But why do the Breen do it? It doesn't really make sense to be that way on your own ship. And there are some silly stuff like, Michael is using the fact that she's a xenoanthropologist to be able to communicate with the Breen better. So there's a scene in which literally a Breen walks over to them and invites them to a party, and then Michael has to think what to respond, and then she says, "We will come to that party too." And then Book is amazed by her, saying how good it is that you're a xenoanthropologist, otherwise we would not be able to get out of this situation. And he's not being cynical, it's not any kind of irony in that scene, at least not one I detect. It was a totally serious scene. And I keep thinking, you don't really have to be a xenoanthropologist to be able to respond to a question, will you come to a party, by saying yes. You don't really have to be a genius to be able to get out of that dialogue. And so Book being so amazed by her that it's so useful that she's a xenoanthropologist, that she's able to respond to that question of whether or not they will go to the party with a yes. And he's all amazed by that. So that was kind of unintentional comedy. I don't think it was deliberate. And I think I almost wish this episode would be stupider, because at least it would have been funnier. If there were more situations like that in which they do stupid decisions which cause them trouble in it somehow being able to get out of it, maybe it would be funnier. So I wish it would be more like that Orville episode in which they were pretending to be Krill on a Krill ship, but being so bad at it, so incompetent, and yet still succeeding. Then that would be much more funny and entertaining. And so this episode did have some elements of that, so I did kind of enjoy this episode, but it could have been much better. And also, a lot of things still don't really make sense with the overall season if you actually think about it. You know, these are some unusual black holes with a Lagrange point between them. So how come in billions of years no one ever came to study them? No one ever found that device in between those two black holes? Or was it left there by those scientists? If so, why did they say that those black holes were there for billions of years? That implies that the progenitor tech was sitting there all along. Otherwise, why mention that? So it wasn't put there by those scientists 800 years ago. It was there for billions of years. And if so, how come no one else in the whole galaxy ever found it? No one ever came to study those two black holes and saying, oh, there's a Lagrange point between them. Let's study what's there. How come no one ever found that gateway that was there before those scientists did? And how did those scientists even find it? I mean, they say one of those scientists was in that meeting when Picard saw the message of the progenitor, but that message didn't really have any more information except the message itself, so there was no information about how to find their technology. So how the hell did that scientist manage to find that location just by viewing that message? And so a lot of things don't really make any sense, and I guess will never be explained, but I guess we'll wait and see in the next episode, which will be the final episode of Discovery. And I will finally start compiling all the different compilations I was collecting throughout the whole series. You know, things like people saying no response. There was a scene like that in this episode as well, of some unknown guy in the Federation headquarters saying there's no response from the Breen fleet. And it's always a black guy who is a communication officer whose only job is to say there's no response. So that's true. Even in the Starfleet headquarters, there's a guy like that whose only job is to say there's no response. And there's some cursing in this episode. So I will do a lot of compilations like that when the series is over. So that should be a lot of fun, I think. So that's it for now. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.